Hey, it's Lemon. Welcome to the Backlogs. Today on Surviving Salt and Sanctuary, we're going to be covering some of the basics that every player should know before starting their journey. Feel free to use the timestamps to skip to the parts that are most relevant to you. And, while I'll be doing my best to keep things short and to the point here, if you learn better through reading, feel free to use my homemade wiki for Salt and Sanctuary. May it be a candlelight to you in this roaring salt sea. Link in the description. So, without further ado, let's get started. Upon beginning a new game, you'll immediately be presented with several choices, all of which probably mean nothing to you. So let's start there. Name should be fairly obvious, just put in what you'd like this character to be known by. Simple enough. Sex lets you switch between male and female characters. This is aesthetic only, so pick whatever suits your fancy. The next few settings are all aesthetic in nature as well, so feel free to play around with everything to your heart's content and make the character you want. And yes, you can have a beard as a female character. Origins, while important to the lore of the game, don't affect anything gameplay-wise. So if you're the kind of person who wants to play as a lizard, demon, or whatever the hell this is, have no fear. You won't be at a disadvantage for doing so. These last two options, however, are very important when starting a new character, and will likely change how easy or hard of a time you have getting into Salt and Sanctuary. Your starting class will determine what your character's starting gear is, as well as what skills they know at the beginning of the game. There's a class for every playstyle, so if one of them sounds more fun than the others, that's probably the one you should start with for your first playthrough. And don't worry, as you play through the game, there's no reason you can't mold your character to fit a different style of play, should you change your mind. As for effects, think of them as an item that your character wouldn't normally start with. You don't have to take one, but it's highly advised that you do. Let's dive into classes. We have several options here, so we'll quickly go through each one in turn to help explain what they are and what they can do. First off, we have the Knight. Wearing heavy armor and wielding a sword and shield, this is a good class for anyone who likes a healthy balance of offense and defense, or is just generally unsure of what kind of build they want to play. Able to take a hit, this class is a shield that can block most early game damage, which means you'll have more chances to learn enemy attack patterns or wait for the right moment to strike. And if you want to practice rolling through attacks instead of blocking them, the Knight can do that too, albeit not as well as some of the lighter classes. This class starts with the sword and heavy armor skills. And if the idea of skills is confusing to you, don't worry. I'll cover that in another video. Next we have the Mage. If you're the kind of player who wants to throw heaps of magic and destruction at your enemies, this is the class for you. Mages are pretty fragile at the start of the game, so be prepared to dodge attacks and stay out of range of enemies for a while. But if you stick with it and build your character correctly, you'll be one-shotting everything that comes across your path. Mages start with a sword, wand, and the flashfire spell, and a ring that keeps them from injuring themselves with their own magic through elemental imbalance, which I'll cover later as well. As expected, the Mage has the spell, incantation, and wand skills. The Paladin is the exact opposite of the Mage. Relying on heavy armor and large weapons to demolish their foes, Paladins are a good choice for anyone who plans on crusading across the island, smashing through everything in their path. While they can't use prayers from the start, their skill tree is set up so that they can easily access prayers after leveling up a few times. This class starts with some consumables that can be thrown at enemies for holy damage, as well as a health regeneration ring. Combine that with the healing prayers down the road, and this class becomes very difficult to kill. Paladins have the heavy armor, hammer, and axe skills. Thieves are next, and they play exactly as you'd expect. Fans of quick movement and tricky tactics, this class is for the players interested in fast-paced combat. Thieves don't do much damage, having only a dagger and a small shield to start, but what they lack in damage, they gain in speed. This class also starts with grenades and poisonous throwing knives, giving players a taste of the power consumables have when used in the right situation. If you're the kind of player who tends to dive headfirst into dexterity or ranged weapon builds, this is the class for you. Thieves have the light armor and dagger skills. The Chef class is, well, it's quite literally a joke. With no skills and no special equipment, this class is meant for players who are just looking to goof off or challenge themselves. That said, each bit of equipment the Chef starts with can actually be wildly effective if used properly. The Iron Pot becomes one of the better maces in the game when fully upgraded, and the Chef outfit is great against poison damage. However, if you're new to Salt and Sanctuary, I would recommend picking a different class. The Cleric class is the class for players who are interested in using prayers, but don't want the burden of wearing heavy armor. While their armor and shield leave something to be desired, the mace is a great starting weapon that does quite a bit of damage, especially against armored enemies. They also start with a dagger for enemies that are weaker to slashing attacks, and even have a mending prayer to give players additional healing at the start of the game. Their ring gives them a larger mana pool, known as focus, which means they can cast prayers and spells more times than other classes. And if you're planning on playing cooperatively with a friend, using healing prayers will heal both players, making this a fantastic support class as well. The Cleric starts with the light armor and prayer skills. The Pauper seems like another joke class at first, but in reality, it's actually a great base for players who want to completely customize their build from the start of the game. While their starting armor and shield are pretty awful, the pitchfork and axe they wield are strong enough to carry players through the first few levels of the game until they can find better weapons. They also have a few fire pots, which, when used correctly, can demolish anything and everything in the game. But that's a story for another time. The Pauper has no skills, but this just means that players can level up and select skills of their choosing, rather than being stuck with starting skills they may not have otherwise wanted to use. And lastly, we have the Hunter. Wielding a whip, sword, and crossbow, this class is for players who are interested in playing an unconventional dexterity build. With armor that isn't quite light but isn't quite heavy, the Hunter class is good for players who are interested in dual wielding a melee and ranged weapon, with weapon combos allowing the player to back hop in and out of combat, and later weapons like the pistols offering an even greater damage increase. This class is an interesting one. I wouldn't recommend it for brand new players, but it's worth a try once you get a better feel for the game. Hunters start with the whip, crossbow, and pistol skills. And that'll do it for the classes. Hopefully one of them stood out to you. Oh, and if your first pick doesn't feel quite right after a few minutes of play, don't be afraid to start fresh with a different class. Each class feels a bit different than the others, so play around with each of them until you find the one that fits you. Last but not least, we have the effects. As I said before, these are simply an extra item that you can start with at the beginning of the game. Some of them are wildly better than others, or might be important to how you plan to play the game, so let's make sure you know what you're picking. The first option is 10 red shards. Red shards are a health restoring item that restores 20% of your maximum HP over a period of 10 seconds. While this sounds like a good choice, it's not. Red shards can be bought from any merchant, heal slowly in comparison to your standard health potions, and are really only useful if you're slowly navigating a level and need a heal between fights. Important, for sure, but less useful than the other options. Next is the Stone Sellsword. The Sellsword item allows access to the game's multiplayer system. When you use this item at a sanctuary, you'll be able to summon in another player for cooperative or competitive play. Obviously, if you plan on playing through Salt and Sanctuary alone, this item is almost completely useless to you. It does give a small stat boost when used, but we'll go over that in another video. If, however, you intend to play with a friend, you'll need to make a choice. You can select this effect and be able to play cooperatively 5 minutes into the game, or you can wait. Stone sellswords can be found throughout the island, and one is immediately available after the first boss. So unless you want to play through the entire game with a friend, you're probably better off meeting up a little bit later and selecting a different gift. The Ember Idol is an interesting one. This item is used in Transmutation, a mechanic in the game that lets you change one weapon into another. If you're a new player, I would strongly advise you to select another gift, as the Amber Idol won't be very helpful to you when learning how to play the game. Transmutation isn't available to you until later, and even then requires a deeper understanding of the upgrade system to take full advantage of what it's offering you. Amber Idols will become available to you later on in the game anyway, so don't feel like you're missing out on content by choosing something else. If you're a veteran player, you'll know that this option is great if you have a specific weapon or build in mind, and want to acquire it earlier in the run. But, as I said, definitely a gift I would hold off on until you're more familiar with the game. Next up, we have the gift that 95% of players pick every single time they roll a new character, and rightfully so. The Grasping Ring, when equipped, increases the amount of salt enemies drop by 10%. Considering you'll be using salt to level up, upgrade weapons, and a whole lot more, the more salt you can get your hands on, the better. Unless you have a specific reason for picking another gift, choose the Grasping Ring. And lastly, we have the Crystal Sphere. This gift lets you go to any sanctuary held by a creed other than yours, and convert them without conflict. Normally, in order to convert a sanctuary, you'll have to fight the creed and its guardians, but this sphere makes the conversion process quick, smooth, and painless. Again, if you're a new player, I wouldn't bother with this item as a starting gift. There's several crystal spheres you can find throughout the island, so unless you have a very specific build or playstyle in mind, I'd wait until you find this one naturally instead. Hololo. And that about covers it. For the sake of being thorough, I just want to quickly mention that if you click this box over here, you're given a few challenge run options. These are mainly for those of you wanting a little extra spice in your life, or for those of us in need of YouTube content. And that's about it. After all of that, you should be able to confidently create a character of your own. Remember, don't be afraid to try different classes if something doesn't feel right. Find the build that suits you best, and continue from there. Feel free to subscribe and ring the bell if you want to be notified when I upload the next how-to video, where we'll cover leveling up, the skill tree, and how stats work. But until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all again soon.